Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. This one's going to be pretty quick and straightforward. I'm going to be looking at how Ebony Maw does in PvE content. In the last video, I looked at how the Black Order does in PvP content, and before that, PvE content. Unfortunately, since Ebony Maw was the mid-month tier 3, I wasn't able to test him in PvE content compared to the other Black Order, so that's what this video is about. As per usual for my character reviews, I'll be providing suggestions for skill rotations as well as build options for both PvE and PvP. And since I left this video pretty late compared to the other ones, the patch notes for the next update already dropped, so I'm quickly going to be skimming over those to look at some of the potential best character upgrades and other features and stuff coming with the next update. Also, last thing, if you haven't heard, Marvel Future Revolution is set to soft release today in Canada, and since I live in Canada, I'm gonna be able to play it. So if you're interested to see what that game looks like and what it's about, I'm gonna be live streaming it when it drops, which I believe is at 12 midnight. So yeah, if you want to see me mess around in that game and kind of test some of the mechanics and different features and stuff, you can catch that here tonight on this channel since I'll be streaming through YouTube. Anyways, with that aside, let's get into the video. I'm starting my tests off here just like I did with the other Black Order characters, so same leadership, same support, and same striker. And to keep the testing conditions same with the other characters, at this point I haven't changed my cards, so I still have around 13% pierce and somewhere around 100 to 110, 120 total damage. With the last update, Ebony Maw got a pretty substantial damage increase overall. His newest uniform pretty much gave him another support buff for himself alone, so he has, from his tier 2 passive, a 50% damage increase versus superheroes, which is one of the reasons why he's so great in PvP content as well, but he also has 30% increased damage versus supervillains too. And this is on top of the uniform passive, which he had before, but now is buffed from 25% increase damage to universal types up to 35%. Considering that most of the world bosses are ultimate typed, then he has a pretty big damage advantage right from the get-go. Not to mention the fact that he also has a self leadership of 40% increased energy damage. You obviously don't see me use it here because I'm trying to keep the testing consistent with the previous ones I had. One setback with his uniform is that he doesn't have all defense down that ignores immunity. That's only limited to his tier 3 skill, but he does have mind resistance down on his 3rd skill. Fortunately, you'll see that versus the other bosses that can be affected by crowd control effects, unlike Thanos, the 3rd skill has mind control, and most of the time you can keep characters permanently locked down. Like I mentioned briefly before, most of his skills can be insta-cancelled, so if you want to make the most out of him in terms of damage potential, your best bet for a PvE build would probably be a Judgment, since most of his skills are mind-based damage. Alternatively, you could also use a Rage if you have that. I don't know which one would be better than the other since I haven't tested it, but I recommend Judgment first because it's limited to a certain number of characters, so in the grand scheme of your roster, you will probably want to save a Rage for another character. If you're wondering what kind of skill rotation to use, the one that I went with was using the 5th skill first, and then insta-canceling into your 3rd skill, canceling into your 4th skill, then canceling into your 2nd skill, and then delay canceling into the 1st skill. You want to use the 5th skill first because it has a damage buff, and then your 3rd skill second because it has the mind resistance down for most of the bosses that you fight, and because it has the mind control, again, for most of the bosses that you fight, but not World Boss Legend, obviously, or Thanos. I had to cut off the video a bit early since I had to pause the fight, but I finished Thanos stage 50 with 2 minutes and 14 seconds remaining. If you don't have a Rage or a Judgment, the skill rotation that you can use is, again, start with your 5th skill, then use your 3rd skill, and immediately go into your 4th skill, and then just sit in that. Hopefully it procs on the 4th skill, since that's a long iframe skill, and that would probably be the best rotation for a single skill damage proc. By that I mean a CTP of energy, but if you wanted to build him for hybrid or for PvP, a CTP of destruction could work because of such long iframes. You can avoid the damage and deal a lot of damage yourself. He doesn't have penetration, so that would really help his build for that. Because of his really long iframes, you could probably make a CTP of greed work as well, and to be honest, you could probably use any CTP for him. If you pair him up with Call Obsidian, then he also gets that guard break immunity, so you make things like a CTP of Transcendence work too, or even a patience if you wanted to, but you're more than likely going to be capped out on dodge using his uniform and your card stats and whatever else. If you're wondering what build I went with authority since he doesn't have damage accumulation, and I wanted that extra survival for him to be able to solo if that's what I wanted to do. If you're not going to use him primarily as the main damage dealer for PvE or want him to solo in PvP, then Insight is your best choice since you're more than likely going to use him for a support versus those universal types. You can see in this fight that even though he doesn't have damage accumulation and all defense down, even versus a character like Call Obsidian that has a lot of defense, that mind control lockdown, and the high damage from all of his skills, and the fact that you can layer them all one after another, allows him to take down stage 99 of pretty much any world boss ultimate without any hassle at all. Even without the T3, I finished with 3 minutes and 14 seconds left. Ironically, the fastest clear that I had of the tests that I did was Ebony Maw versus Ebony Maw world boss himself. And the reason for that, like I said, was because of the mind control and because all of his damage is now typed as mental. And since Ebony Maw World Boss has a disadvantage versus element types, then you can see how that goes. Yeah, anyways, even at T2, I was able to finish the fight with 3 minutes and 45 seconds remaining. The cost to upgrade Maw is the same as Proxima, so it's going to take you 10 Universal Books as well as 1,200 Cosmic Cube Fragments. The stat increases that he gets are also pretty good. He gets about 11,000 energy damage and roughly around 24,000 HP increase. After you T3 the character, his skill rotation remains the same, and when you have your ultimate, you would probably want to open with that, or alternatively, you could also use your 5th skill to get that damage buff active first. Unfortunately, if you do that, then you'll miss out on filling up your ultimate on the next go around. However, since the ultimate skill can't be insta-cancelled if you want to get the most damage out of it, then using the 5th skill first might not be such a bad idea, since your cooldown will start on the 5th skill and you'll get it back up more quickly. So potential skill rotation that you can use if you don't want to open with your ultimate is to use your 5th and 4th skill right before you activate the 6th. Just keep in mind that when you use the ultimate skill, you don't want to cancel it right when you see the blue aura appear. It's when the eyes appear on the stage that you get the most damage from the ultimate skill, and it's at that point where you can cancel and start going into your skill rotation. If you cancel the ultimate skill before those eyes appear, you're going to miss out the majority of the damage from the skill. So just make sure you don't do that since it makes a pretty big difference. Also, I forgot to mention earlier, you want to cancel the 2nd skill after he kind of draws in energy and then shoots it out and effects appear. So that's the moment when you want to cancel and go into your 1st skill. If you cancel the 2nd skill before he kind of throws out that energy and the special effects activate, then you won't get that additional damage. The 2nd skill special effects will kind of look like little firework explosions around the enemy. With the T3 upgrade, I was able to finish the same stage 38 seconds faster than before. Versus Call Obsidian, I finished the fight 45 seconds faster than before. And then finally versus Maw, I finished 33 seconds faster than before. Again, similar to the other Black Order characters, after T3ing Maw, I took him versus Null stage 9 and used the same leadership, support, and strikers as my other tests. With this setup, I finished with 57 seconds remaining, which is a little bit slower than the other Black Order characters, but the benefit of Maw is that he has his own leadership, so that's what I'm testing in the next fight. So in the 2nd test, I'm using a more ideal team composition and taking advantage of Maw's own leadership, and with that in consideration, I'm able to finish 18 seconds faster than the previous run with the Thanos leadership. I still finished about 3 seconds slower than Black Dwarf, but I didn't really test Maw out versus Null as much as I did the other characters, so if I refined the rotation a little bit more, I'm pretty sure I would have finished way quicker. Also keep in mind that all of these tests that I did was with no damage proc at all. I wasn't able to test Maw versus Galactus when he was at T2, but you can see from the results here that I was able to complete the fight at T3 in about 1 minute and 28 seconds. If you're wondering how good that is relative to the other Black Order, Corvus was just a bit faster at about 4 or 5 seconds quicker, and Maw was faster than the rest of the Black Order by about anywhere from 10 to 20 seconds or more. So with the exception of Corvus and Black Dwarf being pretty close in terms of the clear times for Giant Boss Raid Galactus and Null, I'd say that Ebony Maw is easily the best PvE character out of this Black Order squad. Even though it looks like he has the worst benefit from the T3 upgrade, you can't really go that much higher when you have the fastest clear time of the Black Order. If anything, this means that if you were to keep the character at T2, it would probably be fine, since the upgrade you would get at T3 wouldn't be as hugely substantial. You would probably notice it the most if you tried to build him as a solo character for PvP, or if you completely deck him out for PvE with a damage proc like a Rage or Judgment. But yeah, that's pretty much the Black Order, and every single one of these characters are amazing for both PvE and PvP. Before I end the video, I wanted to look at some highlights of the patch notes to look at some of the prominent changes that I think are coming with the next update in a few hours. With Falcon's new uniform, he gets health recovery and a self debuff, so he might be pretty interesting to use as a solo character in PvP content. He doesn't really have anything else that stands out in his kit, but his T3 stats on paper look amazing for PvE content. I don't think I've seen any other character in the game get as high of a damage accumulation increase as a 1.5%. Winter Soldier's passive didn't really get much of an upgrade, but his uniform passive seems pretty good and oriented towards PvE with chain hit damage. On top of that, the third skill now has damage accumulation for damage dealt, which should add on top of that PvE content push. His ultimate also got an iframe ignore, which should help in World Boss, but his fifth skill seems to have lost fear, which was really useful for PvP. Unless he has really good iframes, it's going to be tough to see how well he does in PvP. Zemo's uniform effect is pretty basic at 5% increase to all attack, but fortunately his leadership also gave him an additional 10% increase to all attack for villain allies on top of the 35% ignore to dodge. With a leadership like that, and the fact that he didn't get an awakening or a T3, kind of leads me to believe that he might be the mid-month tier 3. Although, since we did get 2 T3s this patch, that's Falcon and Taskmaster, and only one awakening, which is Yelena, I would probably guess that he might get an awakening instead. Sad note, unfortunately his tier 2 passive didn't really get touched, and it really needed some help. On the positive side, his third skill got an iframe ignore and has a 100% chance to penetrate all defenses, so that's super armor, barrier, shield, all damage immune, and invincible for 3 seconds. Depending how his other skills work and how his kit comes together, this skill might be pretty pivotal to make him a top-notch character for PvP. For Alliance Conquest. Unfortunately, unless he gets an awakening or a T3, he won't really break into the meta, since most characters need that now with that stat bump increase. Speaking of stat bump increase, Yelena is finally getting her awakening, and she's already an amazing character in PvP because of her iframe ignore, and now she's gonna get even better with this skill and the stat bump. Not to mention that if you don't use her winter suit, you use her PvE suit, she's already really good in PvE content as well. I have a sneaking suspicion that she might be the best character of this update, but we'll see how that turns out. Another interesting thing to note is that she is one of the first characters in her awakening that is getting health recovery as well as penetration to all defenses, including invincible. This means that if you can stall long enough, or you win your first fight in an Alliance Conquest battle, the second fight will almost guaranteed be an insta-kill, most likely even without the use of a damage proc. On top of that, Yelena is also getting immunity to all damage on her first skill and HP recovery. And the reason that this is so important is because the first skill is oftentimes on a low or short cooldown, meaning that it's going to be spammed often. So having immunity to damage and healing on it is a pretty big deal. You may have noticed also that line 15 of the patch notes or the changes say the Taskmaster is getting damage accumulation on his fifth skill, and this is for damage taken instead of dealt. But the amount is one of the highest ones at 150, which is similar to Sharon Rogers. Some people are mad that this is damage received instead of damage dealt, but Taskmaster's current kit doesn't have a lot of iframes, which lends well to damage taken. So this change should synergize pretty well, or at least I hope. Taskmaster's T3 skill doesn't look that great on paper, but hopefully does a lot of hits or a lot of damage. On top of that, hopefully his stat bump is significant enough to let him be good as a standalone character. I also noticed that they're making it harder to vote for the top player in Timeline Challenger League since they're hiding the ranks now. I understand that they're probably trying to make it so players spread their votes out more, but this isn't the way to go about doing that. The only thing that this accomplishes is that it just makes it harder to vote for the top player and pretty much reduces the rewards for the majority of the community. If they wanted to improve this aspect, the best thing they could have done with this change is to give you rewards back for the player that you voted for depending on how well they place at the end of the week. So instead of getting rewards only for the player that you voted that was in the top spot, if you vote for a player that was in the top 10 or 20, you would get a fraction of the rewards as well. Either way, the current change isn't enough and more needs to be done. And that's Ebony Maw and the highlight of the patch notes. Like I mentioned previously, I'm going to be streaming Marvel Future Revolution when it drops tonight at midnight, 12 Eastern time. So again, if you want to catch that, it'll be on my YouTube channel and I'll be streaming it live through YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, and bell notify if that's what you want to do. Hopefully it is. But as always, thanks for your time and watching. But the video is now over.